Hi, my name is Michael Shesky, longtime journalist here in the greater Cleveland area, Northeast Ohio. And I knew about our guest today by reputation long before I met him in person. And I'm glad to say that I was so lucky to meet him in person. They say that journalists are the midwives of history. And our guest today has witnessed so much of that history and even made a lot of that history himself. His name is Art Schreiber, and Art has outlined a lot of that in a new book called Out of Sight, Blind, and Doing All Right. And what a great honor it is to be here with Art Schreiber. Art, welcome.
Thank you, Mike, very much. It's great to be here and back to Cleveland.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you were in Cleveland, actually, for an appearance at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Is that correct?
Yes. The Rock's Archives and Library had invited me back because they're doing Archives Month is the month of October, and the Beatles' 50th anniversary of their first tour is this year, and the Cleveland concert was sometime in September 17th, maybe the 15th, I'm not sure. And so that's why they brought me back, because I was one of two American reporters who traveled with the Beatles on that first cross-country tour of North America.
Well, you were on that tour because you had a lot of experience, and let's talk about how you got that experience. You're from Ohio, East Liverpool, is that correct?
Yes, East Liverpool. Well, I was born in Canton, and moved to a farm near East Liverpool on old Route 30, and was raised on that farm through the 8th grade. I went to one-room school for 8 years.
Is that right?
Now, I didn't spend 8 years in one grade, but I did spend 8 years in one room.
Yeah, sure. Well, you came from a family of orators. I mean, your dad was in religion and politics, is that correct?
Yes, he was mayor of East Liverpool, and then a Presbyterian minister. One of the very few ministers, at that time only 4, that had never had a college degree or a divinity degree. The best he did was the 4th grade. He was removed from school by his grandfather and to work on a farm.
But obviously a great reader and very much into education.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, and he became a blacksmith first. And as he said, he fixed all the kids' toys, skates, sleds, bicycles, when he was a blacksmith in East Liverpool, and they grew up to vote for him.
Oh. Well, was he an influence on your career?
Yes, he was. Every morning he would get up, and before he'd go out, he managed for a very wealthy man in East Liverpool. He managed a 2,000-acre cattle farm. 2,000
acres?
Yeah. That, in Ohio, that's a big farm.
Boy, wow.
And he managed that farm, and so he would listen to the radio, the news at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we could only listen to 3 radio stations, WTAM in Cleveland, which I guess the call letters have come back. And then WLW in Cincinnati. And KDKA in Pittsburgh.
All classic stations.
And so I don't know why, but as a little kid, I would sit with my father and listen. I didn't know what they were talking about, but I always said I would like to do that. What I was hearing on the radio.
Well, you know, the amazing thing about WLW, I'm very much into radio history. WLW in Cincinnati served a large German community as well. And during World War II, they went to 500,000 watts. so they could
right.
broadcast to Europe. Now, the people that live near the transmitter were picking this thing up on their teeth, on, out of bed springs, everything else. They thought they were hearing voices, but people speaking German to them. When you listen to that, and you listen to these wonderful voices that were coming out of WTAM and KDKA and, of course, WLW, you have to think, I have to set my sights pretty high to get to that.
Yeah, but you don't think about that as a kid. You just say, I want to do that. And then the big break I got was I had a wonderful speech teacher in high school, a woman by the name of Ruth Sloan. Mm-hmm. And she came to me one day. Now, you see, I was an outcast because I was a farm boy. Mm. And I took a school bus into town every day to go to school. I couldn't participate in extracurricular activities. Yeah. And and also during the war, the World War II had just started, and my name was not the right name. Schreiber was a German name, and so I took a lot of abuse because of the Germans and the Nazis. Well, Ruth Sloan came to me and said, do you know anything about football? And which I did. Mm-hmm. And she said, I'd like you to do the games on the PA system at the stadium. Ooh, it was a wonderful break. I did it, and at the end of that season, she said, would you like to do basketball? And I said yes, because then I didn't have to sit outside. I could sit inside. and it was wonderful. But that was really my big break, to get to do that and announce, even though it was into a microphone that only the stadia heard.
Sure.
Well, that was great. And that really whet my appetite. And then I went to Westminster College in New Wilmington, Pennsylvania, majored in speech, but unfortunately, after 2 semesters, now I'd gone to the Army after 1 semester, spent 2 years, and then came back, and my major advisor called me in and said, you ought to get out of the speech department and get into something you could make a living at.
Yes,
and
amazing.
It blew my mind. Yeah. But I had a wonderful psychology professor, and she was head of the department, Blanche Carrier, who wrote a wonderful book called Free to Grow. Mm-hmm. And I went to her, and because I didn't know what to do, all I wanted to do was be in radio. And she said, look, pursue your dream, follow it, don't listen to them, and you're going to have to change your major. So I majored in Bible, philosophy and psychology.
Great calling for that, yes.
So anyway, I graduated from high school and went to Kent State for graduate school, didn't finish, went back to radio in East Liverpool, and that was my big break.
Now, I find it fascinating that you went through the master's program at Kent State University, which even then was a tough program, and the only thing that kept you from getting your master's was you didn't do your thesis.
That's right.
Because you were too busy. That's amazing. Jeez. Well, you still got some time now, And quite honestly, this book, Out of Sight, is really a thesis on just the human spirit and some wonderful things that you were able to find out from your own experiences. Let me ask you though, when you're talking about, coming up through the ranks and even getting through school, and you have to have great self-discipline. And how did you learn that?
I think probably my father had a lot to do with that. For example, I had to, in those days, we didn't have anything. Before he even was managing the farm for $20 a week, and we had 30-some hands, helpers, to do that. He supervised over a staff of over 30, those 2,000 acres, had 2,000 head of cattle. Before that, when he came to that old country church, all he got was what was in the collection plate every Sunday. And the most that was ever in the collection plate on any one Sunday between 32 and 1939 was $3.57.
Wow.
That's how we lived. We had no running water, no electricity. Everything was oil lamps and et cetera. But I learned as a kid, my father never complained. This was what you did, and you made the best of it. And I just think growing up like that, you know, my parents were really, truly wonderful to me, but preached constantly an education, that I needed to get an education. And whatever you did to the best of your ability, no matter what was the problem.
Another thing about when you discover, when you talk about never say die, I thought it was a great, there was a great story about there where you wanted to meet some girls at Kent, and I think it was at Kent, and you took a job as a waiter. Is that right?
No, that was in college,
Okay.
at Westminster.
Oh, at Westminster. Okay,
yeah,
yeah.
and I was the head waiter. I became the head waiter of the girls' dormitory. Now, you can't get much luckier than that at college. But the reason I had dated this girl from Pittsburgh, Alice Vogel, and she was wonderful. But then, unfortunately, she had invited me to a sorority dance in Pittsburgh over the Christmas break. And when we came back to college, I was in the Titan Union building. Excuse me, they called it the Tub because Titan Union building spelled T-U-B.
Sure.
And I was sitting there waiting on Alice when a beautiful young freshman girl walked up and sat down with me and was talking, and sorority sisters of this Alice Vogel called her at her dormitory and said, "Art's sitting with someone, blah, blah, blah."
Oh,
well,
no.
she never came over, and that broke up the romance. We never started dating until our senior year again. And I was sitting in the tub one time, and Alice walked by. And in those days, Mike, girls wore saddle shoes,
Sure.
ankle socks, bobby socks.
Yeah.
And oh, she looked fabulous. And she walked by me, and I said, "Alice, sit down." And I didn't know she had broken up with her boyfriend.
Ah, okay.
So we started dating, and that was the beginning of a wonderful romance, and we had 22 years of a wonderful marriage.
So what about the parents, though? There was
They didn't like it very much.
I was going to say that.
Because they believed that a radio man, I was going to go into radio, and I was in radio at the time, after college. And they said, "Oh, that's worse than a used car salesman." And so they tried to break up the romance by sending her to Europe with her brother for 3 months. And when she returned, they met her at the dock in New York and drove from New York to Pittsburgh. And guess who was sitting on their front porch waiting for them to arrive but Art Schreiber. And her mother said, Alice always said, pulling up into the driveway, and they saw me on the porch, her mother said, "Well, I guess there's no getting rid of him."
Well, you stayed in touch with her, though, right?
I
mean,
did.
when she was in Europe.
Yes, I did. But you know, the wonderful thing that I didn't get to talk about in the book was her parents became so close to me, and my relationship with them was wonderful because I then fortunately was successful in radio, and they would hear me on KDKA. Of course, I covered so many stories nationally.
Sure.
And Westinghouse owned KDKA and KYW in Cleveland, WBZ in Boston. etc. And so when they could hear me, well, that made a big difference. But then we had a great relationship. They would visit us wherever we were, and we likewise would visit.